We're here live with politics reporter Jane Tabor. Jane just wrote her last column for the Globe and Mail. So we wanted to talk with her about her 37 years in the biz and what it's been like covering women in politics. Jane, thank you so much for being here. It's kind of bittersweet. So I want to start with, you've been here for more than 37 years doing journalism. Yeah. Let's talk about how you got started down this path.
Well, I started when I was 21, so you guys can do the math. And I started in Ottawa right out of journalism school. And you know, back then, and I hate those stories about back then we did it this way or whatever, but back then I'd always wanted to be a political reporter. In fact, I'd wanted to be a political reporter since I watched conventions on television, the political conventions and the leadership conventions. I was so fascinated by that. I don't know what struck me. I think it was the people involved, the competition, some of the things that they were talking about really spoke to me. And so I decided to get into journalism, ended up at the Ottawa Citizen, but I didn't get into politics right away. I was close because I was in Ottawa, you know, the nation's capital, and Parliament Hill was just down the street from where I worked. You know, I had to start the old-fashioned way, working nights, doing school boards, cops, covering the police beat and that sort of thing. And then eventually I worked my way up onto Parliament Hill, and I was just, every day I was working on Parliament Hill. And it was a 25-year run on the Hill at various newspapers. I was at the Citizen, I was at the National Post, and I joined the Globe and Mail 14 years ago. Every day I would look in the House of Commons and in the main Parliament buildings and just sort of like pinch myself and think, look around. There's a lot of history here. There's a lot of history to come, and just like take a moment and pause and think about this place. That's how much I enjoyed it.
So you mentioned that you watched it on TV before you became a political journalist. What was it like when you actually did become a political journalist? What surprised you?
There were lots of surprises, and one of the big surprises was, because I think that politicians get a real knock, is that most of the people that I met along the way were in it for public service, that they weren't in it for power. We used to always hear the narrative of the fat cats in Ottawa, the bureaucrats in Ottawa, and the politicians, and the fact that they were only in it for themselves and only in it for power. A lot of criticism, and that I think is still, you still hear that today. But from my vantage point and from what I was doing, I saw people who went to Parliament Hill because they had a point of view and they wanted to do something. Either they wanted to do something for their local community, the ridings that they represented, or they wanted to do something for the country, and it wasn't some sort of power grab. But the way I really got into it was when I was in journalism school in my first year of journalism at Carleton University. Flora MacDonald was running for the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, replacing Robert Stanfield. For those guys out there, I don't know if you remember Robert Stanfield, but she was the only woman in the race, and there was there's more than half a dozen men that she was running against, and I thought, you know, I'm gonna support her. Like, I like the idea that there's a woman running for a federal political party, and I want to give her my support, because I think that takes a lot of courage. She was she died last year. She was 89 when she died, but she was a true red Tory. We don't really see those red Tories anymore. She was fiscally conservative. A friend of mine who I was talking to the other day said, you know, she was really tight. Like, she really watched her money, so she would have done that for the country. And she was also, but she was socially compassionate. She was pro-choice, and she was anti-capital punishment at a time when those views were in the minority in the caucus where she sat. Because you remember, this is the 70s. She's the only woman in a caucus of more than, I think, 100 men for the Progressive Conservatives. And she put her voice out there. She put herself out there to run for the leadership. And I thought, hey, I'm going to support her. So actually, and I wrote about this today in my last column, and I actually joined a political party, which is a big no-no for a political reporter. You do not take a side, right? I have some friends who are journalists, political journalists, who don't even vote because they don't want to take a side. And I took a side, and I joined the party to support her. My membership lapsed after a year, but I continued covering women in politics.
Do people still remember that you supported her back then?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago, and the friends that I met along the way remember that. It was a great campaign that she ran, and she then went to support Joe Clark. She lost. She, in fact, didn't do as well in the first ballot as she thought she had, because I think people were uncomfortable voting for a woman. And they had promised, she had, tracked delegates, and it looked like she was going to do really, really well on that first ballot. And it did not materialize because people, I think, went to the ballot, and it was a secret ballot, and they were really uncomfortable with voting for a woman. And so she was let down in that respect.
We've certainly come a long way since then.
Yeah.
I just want to take this moment right now to tell the people watching on Facebook, if you have any questions for Jane, please put them in the comments, and I will ask as many as I can. Jane, you mentioned Flora, and you've done a lot of reporting on women in politics, some incredible reporting. I want to ask you, who is the most memorable woman you've met, and why?
Well, there's a lot, so that's a really hard question to answer. So
maybe a few.
Yeah, I'll talk about a few. I talked about Flora MacDonald, who was an inspiration at that time. Kim Campbell. She was a cabinet minister in Mulroney's government. She was the first female defense minister. She ran for the leadership. She won in '93, and when she stood there in the same venue where Flora MacDonald had lost, when she stood there, when Kim Campbell was there in '93 giving her acceptance speech, again, I took a pause and said, hey, Canada has a female prime minister. This is historic. Mm-hmm. Now, it didn't last very long. She called an election a few months later and was defeated really badly by the Liberals in 1993. But for a moment in time, it looked like there was a breakthrough for women. And so that was really inspirational. So she merits a mention because of her place in history. But in '93, there were a number of dynamic women who came into the Liberal caucus as a result of the wholesale Liberal win. The Tories were reduced to 2 seats in that election, and the Liberals won a majority under Jean Chrétien. And a lot of interesting new women came in. And it was a pretty heady time for women because you felt that there was a critical mass of women, of strong women who could make a difference. And I had to tell you a funny story because this is how backward the House of Commons, the centre block is. There is, to me, it always oozed with testosterone. Like all of the symbols in the centre block are male, and it is a very male place, sort of stark, cold, carved limestone walls, and all of the portraits and statues are men. So portraits of all the prime ministers line the corridors, and the statues and the carvings are all kind of male and everything. So it's a very, very male place. So these women arrive, tons of women arrive in '93. Well, not tons, but a good number of women arrive in '93 as MPs. And of course, there's votes, and there's long days that you spend actually in the House of Commons if you're debating. There is no bathroom. There is no bathroom just outside the door of the House of Commons. There's for women. There's a huge bathroom for the guys, and the women had to run downstairs and into the bowels of the center block to find a bathroom, run back in for their vote. And so they demanded, we need a bathroom right up here. So they subdivided or took some space from this huge, luxurious male bathroom to make a female bathroom. I mean, those are the kinds that was a victory. That was a victory for women. It was funny, but I always thought it was really, really telling about how women were kind of unusual characters, in the House of Commons, and now that is changing. So there was, as I said, there was an interesting number of women. In my column, I mentioned Shaughnessy Cohen, and who was a great female MP from Windsor. Sadly, she died actually in the House of Commons in 1998. Sheila Copps, who was Jean Chrétien's deputy prime minister at the time, and she was the heritage minister. She was a force to be reckoned with. She had a child before they formed government. She had a child who she would bring to the Commons, and so she was doing that kind of thing way before there was great maternity leaves or help for support for women who had children. So Sheila Copps is another one to mention, and I should mention Carolyn Bennett. She came in early on as well into that Chrétien government. She is now in Trudeau's government as the Minister for Indigenous and Northern Affairs, and so she is someone who came with a background as a feminist doctor, very, very strongly pro-choice, and her views were really well known on Parliament Hill and important on Parliament Hill. And in opposition, just before the Trudeau government was formed, she really worked hard on the whole Indigenous file, and we're seeing kind of the results of that, of her work, and how comfortable she is with that file now as she's minister, because now she's just announced that there's going to be a forum into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. So that's important. And those are the kinds of sort of important things. I mean, they're not, a lot of these women aren't flashy or in any way, as well known as some of the men, but they've made important contributions to the Hill.
Great. Well, Jane, we got a couple comments coming in here from Facebook. A couple of congratulations. Great career, Jane. All the best in the future. Someone says, come back down east. We love you here. Best
Thanks.
of health and luck going forward.
Thank you.
And I have a question here from Julie Ovanel. Says, Jane, good luck to you. I've enjoyed following your work. My question, like you, I'm a Carleton J School grad. I'm often asked by my graduating students if there is any point in trying to pursue a career in journalism these days. What would you say?
I would say go for it. I'm leaving because I have a great new opportunity. There's something that I'd like to try. As you said, I've been in this business for a long time, but there is room for young people and new people, and that's what I was trying to reflect at the end of my column, saying that I'm really looking forward to the new Canadian women journalists who are going to be covering the female politicians, and to see what they have to say, and to see what they have to say about Canada, about the politicians. And so I say, yeah, there is room. It's a different kind of journalism than the kind that I did when I first started, but there is certainly a place for a ton of voices and for people to be the messenger and to tell those kinds of stories. So I don't think that journalism is dead. I don't think the industry is dead. In fact, I'm quite optimistic about the future of journalism in this country.
Well, that's a positive note.
Yeah.
Great. I have another comment here. Josie Arnett says, too much corruption in Canadian politics. I bring that up because you were there. What do you say to that? What did you see?
Well, I was there through the whole Gomery scandal with the Chrétien government. I was there in the tail end of the Mulroney years. I was there for some of the missteps by the Harper government. I think it's true. It happens. We see it happening in every country. It's unfortunate, and isn't it great that we have a good bunch of reporters in the Parliamentary Press Gallery and in the gallery at Queen's Park and all the other legislatures across the country that are vigilant. I mean, that's how those things come to pass. And so what you do is to combat that, you try to elect people who are there, as I said, for public service, and then we'll see less of that. I think governments are trying to become more transparent. It's hard, but we're pushing, and journalists are pushing for that transparency and that accountability. It's not perfect. It's not perfect yet, but incrementally you're seeing that there's changes, and I think that as long as we remain vigilant and hopefully elect the right people, then we'll get good government.
I guess that speaks to the importance of having journalists there all the time as well.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And the importance of I mentioned this also in my column today, the importance of social media. And I talked about the sort of the craven anonymous writers who try to take down people on Facebook, social media, Twitter, whatever. I think those people I think that's changing. I think we're going to see fewer and fewer of those people. And don't get turned off by that. To the people who are thinking about running, people who are really dedicated to public service, especially the women, because sometimes I think there's a double standard with women politicians. I think that they're criticized a lot more harshly than our men for their looks, for how they sound, for what they stand for, that sort of thing. And so don't be turned off by that. Like, fight through that, ignore those voices, because there's so much positivity there.
Jane, I wanted to bring you back to women in politics. Yeah. Since you were there for a long time. What do you think has changed for women in politics?
Well, there's more of them, so that's a good thing. In 2015, we saw Justin Trudeau appoint women to half of the position in his cabinet. That's a good thing, although some people argue quotas aren't so good, but I don't know, I think you have to get a start somehow. So we're seeing that, and it's going to become normal then for women around the cabinet table to see faces that look like theirs, right? We see sort of a better, the country more reflected in that cabinet now than we have in the past. So that's good. So that's a change. But what hasn't changed are, the tone has not changed. Maybe a tiny bit about how women are referred to, and I talked about that earlier. There's a tone. In fact, it'd be interesting. I talked to Christy Clark, the Premier of British Columbia, recently, and we were talking about the fact that she's been the longest, I think, female premier in the country, which is interesting because I think it's been like 5 years or something. It's not a long,
that long time.
I know, but I might be getting my numbers mixed up. But that was sort of the what the narrative was on that story. And she talked about going into a meeting with senior CEOs or whatever. Here, she's the premier of the province. Remember, the big province in this country. And she'd go in with some of her male staff members or whatever, and she'd be sitting around the table, and there'd be male CEOs or company officials across from her, and they would look at her male staffers and not address her. I mean, and I think that all women have probably experienced that when it comes to be addressed in some sort of conference or setting like that, the comfortable position for a lot of men to take is to address their male counterparts, right? And she said she'd always be trying to sort of get their attention, but this is happening to the premier of one of the biggest provinces in the country. So I thought that was sort of telling, and she talks about the tone, and it's true. And I talked to Kathleen Wynne, the premier of Ontario, about this, and Wynne says that there's a tone as well, and that there's women are considered pushy. They're not, whereas men they never refer to a guy as pushy. Like pushy's a bad thing. A man might be kind of aggressive, and he might be making his point or passionate about his point. That's positive, whereas it's kind of turned on its head for women. And so Kathleen Wynne was saying to me that words are important. So these descriptions are important. And I think the more we see more women in politics, the less we'll see of those kind of descriptions, because it will just be normal. You'll be blind to gender, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. And so that's starting to happen, but we need to see more women. We need to see more women step up. We need to see the political parties more supportive of women, not putting them in ridings during elections that aren't winnable. For instance, we'll just throw her in this riding or whatever, and so it will up our numbers for how many women are running, but she would have no chance of being elected. No, let's get women in winnable ridings. Let's level the playing field. Women sometimes don't have the networks that men have in terms of raising money, which is very important. So support women in fundraising and helping out to be able to make a run for a nomination, to be able to run for office. I mean, those kinds of things need to change. I think they are changing, but they're not changing fast enough.
So support more women. We want to see more women faces. What do you hope for the future, though, when it comes to women's representation in politics?
I would like to see the House of Commons be all women. That would be great. Or actually more than half. I would like to go to the press gallery in the next year or so and peer down, or after the next election, and peer down and see a ton of female faces, a ton of young women, and a ton of young men too. Let's get it way more reflective of what Canadian society looks like. Different faces from different ethnic backgrounds. Let's get that going as well, because for so long, I was 25 years on Parliament Hill, a lot of white men in blue suits. I mean, that's what I saw. That's who I was dealing with, and sort of middle-aged men as well. The whole child thing, the piece for women, makes it difficult sometimes. So what you'd see is younger women in politics, and then women older who had already had children. Their children were grown up. You don't have that middle ground. This government is trying to make it a little bit more family friendly, but it hasn't moved fast enough yet again. I mean, they're talking about it, but not a lot has changed so far. So make it easier for women whose kids are 7, 8, 9, 10, or early teenagers to be able to run like that. Those are the kinds of things you have to make it a family-friendly workplace, and the Hill is not a family-friendly workplace, whereas other workplaces in this country are more nimble, I think, when it comes to dealing with women with children.
Now I have a question here from Facebook from Kathleen Tiernan asking, outside of Canadian politics, what do you make of the career of Hillary Clinton and the type of long slog that she has had to endure in her quest for the American presidency?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's fantastic that the Americans have a female presidential candidate. I just think go girl go. I think that is absolutely wonderful. And it's interesting that the States, as big as it is and as important as it is so far behind the UK. This is right now Britain has its second female prime minister. We've already had a female prime minister. You look at some of the other countries in Europe. Angela Merkel, for instance, in Germany. My goodness, she's a very, very powerful woman. So I think for Hillary Clinton, I actually think it's wonderful that she's doing this. She has been subjected to a lot of criticism as well. Some of it she's brought on herself, and I think that it takes courage. I think it takes courage for her to be running for this. I think it takes courage for any woman to actually put themselves out there and get their names on the ballot. But I think it's absolutely wonderful, and I think it's neat for for my daughter, for the other daughters around, for young girls coming up to see that there's a woman running for president.
I just want to mention this comment. It's from Jan. It says hello from Australia. So I thought it was
great.
Worth saying something. It's very similar histories from there and here.
Yeah.
And she just says Jane all the best in future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
Very nice. So I mentioned that this is your last day in the newsroom. You wrote your last column for us. It's going to be sad to miss you here for the Globe and Mail. What will you miss the most?
I'm not sure yet because I've never done anything else. So I've been thinking about that, and that's a really good question. I'll miss the people. I've been here for 14 years, and so I have a lot of good friends in the business. So I'll really miss that. And the fact that when we're on an election campaign or we're at a leadership convention or we're somewhere, when I'm sitting with journalists from all different newspapers and broadcast outlets, that kind of stuff, we're all doing the same thing and we know what we're doing, that we're covering these people and we know how to do it. So I'll miss that sort of professional, professional sort of feeling of doing something that's important. But I think that I'll be going on to something where I can still use my skills in journalism to be able to tell a different kind of story in a different way. So I'm not worried about missing writing, and I'm not worried about missing working in like sort of a team kind of environment like we have here in the newsroom. I don't think I will miss that. There might be some autonomy that I miss. As journalists, we go out and find our own stories, but I don't know because I've never done anything else. So I don't know if what I'll have in my new job. Mm-hmm. But certainly the people and the politicians. But I still hope to be able to see everybody. So I'm not sure. I'm not going far away.
Now we'll talk about what you're up to next. I just want to bring in one last final Facebook question here. Another one about the U.S. asking, do you, Jane, see the divisiveness of U.S. political picture affecting political culture here?
Wow, that actually is a really good question because we have seen some really low kind of politicking in the United States compared to here. And that's a really interesting question because if people see that, if people see how Trump is operating and they see that if it's successful, if Trump succeeds, you have to think that there's going to be some political strategists here who say, hey, that campaign works really well. That sort of authenticity that we see in Donald Trump that is so compelling to, it seems like a great number of people in the United States, maybe that will work here. And we saw it work here in a smaller way with the election of Rob Ford as mayor of Toronto. He presented as that authentic kind of voice, that kind of anti-politician, that I'm going to get rid of the gravy train going to City Hall, that kind of thing. Those kinds of words speak to a lot of people who are legitimately fed up with politics, fed up with the way they feel they have landed right now in this country, that maybe they feel that they're not going any farther than they should be able to go. So it'll be interesting to see if that kind of politics is imported in a bigger way, because we have some of it here, if it's imported in a bigger way here to Canada. And I think it depends on the outcome of the U.S. election race, the presidential race.
I guess we'll have to wait and see on that one. So we're going to wrap up here. And I actually have a couple of comments here asking about what you're going to be up to next. So let's tell everyone what you'll be up to.
I'm joining National Public Relations, which is a big communications and strategy agency. It's based here in Toronto. In fact, it's just down the street, so I don't have a far commute compared to from being at the Globe and Mail. And as I said, I think that I can use my skills in helping get different messages out. I think it's a different way of storytelling, because I'll be specifically telling somebody else's story as opposed to me finding a story. At least I think that's how it's going to work. I'm also going to do media training, showing people how to, do interviews and how to deal with us. Don't be scared. We're not bad. We journalists do not have the kind of agenda that everybody thinks. I mean, we're objective. We want to get this story out, and I'm going to tell people how to do that, and from looking at it from a different vantage point. So that's what I'll be doing. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, they're very lucky to have you.
Oh, thank
We're going to
you.
miss you so much here, Jane. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for everyone on Facebook, if you want to read Jane's last column, there is a link in the comments, and you can go to theglobalmail.com and you'll find it there. Jane, thank you.
Thanks.